Yeah, the thing is, there's a military reason, but then this also feeds the conspiracy theorists. And I mean, I don't mind a little conspiracy theory, Brooks, but I need to see some data in it. I need to be able to follow the data and make a reasonable assumption or a reasonable logistic, logical thought, critical thinking. I have to have something to go on, but.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, on the South Pole then at the Antarctica, I mean, on Google Earth there's a lot of people talking about this big giant cave that goes in. I mean, you can see that on Google Earth. Have you looked at the caves there in Antarctica?
Well, unfortunately, everything on the 60th parallel to the south is also animated. The Antarctic is quite a bit different than the Arctic in that there is a lot of landmass that goes with the Antarctic. And the ice for the Antarctic has been growing steadily for about 50 years. It's larger now than I think, any observation we've ever made. And it's quite thick. Some of it is, several thousand feet thick. So it's obviously a place where you can get some very ancient snapshots of the planet by taking cores of that ice. And in that you can look at microbes and gas content and all kinds of volcanic and snowfall data going back, millions of years if you want to. And that's what mostly goes on down there in the Antarctic. The polar area is not observable. I mean, it's just completely covered with thick ice. But the canyons that exist down there are bigger than anything we have on dry land. It is incredible how deep into the earth those ground formations go. In the Arctic, the sea is about 4,400 meters deep. It is by far the most violent waters on the planet. It's very typical to see 10-story seas up there. Wow. So even in a 450-foot long ship, you're going to be a little bit like a dinghy going up and down, up and down, up and down. And believe me, anybody that has a propensity towards seasickness, they don't want to be any part of this expedition.
I'm not a great seafarer. I'll watch from the armchair any day.
It's not going to be fun.
So, Brooks, I'm sure you've heard about the pyramids down in Antarctica. There's a photograph circling of what people think was an ancient pyramid buried in the ice. Have you looked into that? Do you see any credibility in that?
To be honest, I haven't spent much time looking at the Antarctic at all. It's one of the, curses of being a PhD is you know a lot about very little. Mm-hmm. And we're just taught to focus in on one thing and try to get as much data, really become an expert on that one thing. And although I venture out more than most, I have to be honest, I just don't have that much information about the Antarctic.
Sure. But on the science then of it, I mean, does the Aurora Borealis, the Northern Lights or the Southern Lights for that matter, did they fit into this anyway scientifically? Do we have any, knowledge on that, Brooks, how this fits into, does that, as they are a polar phenomenon, does that fit into this hollow earth theory?
Well, it does, and you ask the question in just about the right way. We, as a scientific community, I won't say myself and my team, really did not know where these auroras come from, either the northern one or the southern one, the Australis or Borealis. The doubt came when we started to do what we call a scatter plot. Scatter plot is where we will plot one piece of data against another piece of data to see if there's a correlation. We're looking for a straight line. We're looking for something, 1-to-1. Every time this happens, that happens. We did a scatter plot between solar wind information and solar flare information and the auroras. And we found that they did not line up very well. They do happen at the same time, but they also happen quite independent of each other. And it was such a question that JPL was contracted to build a set of satellites. Some of the team calls them Themis. I call them Themis. but there are 5 satellites in one nose cone. We launched it in 2006. 2009, and the satellites went up there, and it took a while to get into position. They're not particularly powered. You just have to wait mathematically for them to distribute. They're at different altitudes, and so they travel at different speeds around the planet, and it's an algorithm as to when they line up like a ladder going out into space. And then the system turns on, and we hope for an aurora to happen, and then we can take these measurements like in different orbits going out into space. And it was a couple of years, I think it was in 2011, all of a sudden this paper comes out. We finally found the source for the aurora borealis, and the article called it Cosmic Bullets. Wow. What happened was the satellites lined up, they all turned on, all 5 satellites, and there was a magnetic explosion between satellites number 3 and number 4. And the explosive force went past 4 and 5 out into space, and then past 3, 2, and 1 toward Earth. And when it was calculated to have reached Earth, the aurora borealis happened. The northern lights lit up. And so they published the paper, and really it was the only paper published by the team. And I wrote the team back and I said, this is junk. You can't have one event and then draw conclusions from that. You have to get more data. You've got to understand there needs to be repeatability and reliability. You've got to have, a way to plot this data out so that you can see what the error is in your ideas. Otherwise, anytime there's a coincidence, we could draw cause and effect. And I suppose that's what the religionists in science have done for a long, long time. And we found out that they're wrong most of the time. So I don't know if that project is still going on. NASA has, I think, 63 active space programs. That was one of them. And I don't know if that one still has funding and if it's still going on or not. I haven't seen anything out of the program since then. What it's an indication of, though, is that NASA wasn't sure. After all this time, millions of orbits around the planet with all kinds of tens of thousands of pieces of equipment, we still don't know what causes those auroras. Now, Hollow Earth theory says that, like any rotating planet, you have an electrojet of ions, magnetic ions, that are forced out of the mass of the planet by the magnetic flux that makes up the north and south poles. It's a flow of energy, an unbroken flow of energy. And that when highly charged particles come out of the inside of the planet, they strike the ionosphere or the magnetosphere around the planet, and they have only one way to release energy, and that's in the form of light. And that's what we see. That's why we see auroras over both poles at the same time. Not just the side of the planet that's facing the solar wind.
Yeah, makes sense. Wow. We've had the Northern Lights, the aurora, down as far south as Scotland. You get it in northern Scotland, but we've had it as far south as the top of Ireland. I'm right on the very north of Ireland at the moment, the very top centre of Brooks, and I've just missed it. I know it's my dream to see the aurora without having to go to the North Pole. But, we've had it down this far south. It's what a beautiful sight it is. But like you say, Brooks, we know so little about it. Really, we're grappling with this stuff.
Oh, my family, as you know, is from Stranraer. Yeah. If you've ever taken the ferry from Belfast to Stranraer, you land in Agnew Bay, right next to Agnew Park, and you'll cross Agnew Crescent. So that's where the ancient Agnews are from, and that's where I'm from.
Wow, beautiful. It's a beautiful part of the world, Brooks. I know it well, and I know Stranraer well. I lived in South Scotland for a while, and I actually quite like South Scotland. I miss it every time. I miss it every day I've left. I had to really pull myself away from that place. It's a special place.
Well, the weather's a lot better than where you live. Yeah. The north part of Ireland is just unforgiving in the winter.
Yeah, we got a bit of a hammer in there this last day or so, I have to say.
Goodness.
So, tell us a little bit about the mythology of Hollow Earth, because even, like I say, where I'm at now in Donegal, around the top of Ireland, we have our own mythology here about people going into caves and tunnels into the centre of the earth from County Down up as far as Donegal. There's many, the ancient megalithic builders inherited their monuments from the Tuatha De Danann, and they were known as the people of the earth and like a subterranean inner earth, So even in our part of the world here, we have our own mythology associating this, but it's all around the world, Brooks, isn't it?
It is. The idea of the inner earth or the center of the earth are two different things. At one time, and it was a pretty short period of time, I would say, parenthetically speaking, when it seemed the oceans left their bounds. We call it the ancient flood. It's a common flood motif around the planet. And the way people survived it is, well, of course, we know Noah built an ark. They got a movie come out about it. Mm-hmm. But most people survived it by going into caves because the weather was just so unforgiving. And so when they talk about the inner earth, this is what they talk about. The Mayans talk about it. I spent 2 weeks on the upper plateau in Tibet, and I spoke to lots and lots of monks through an interpreter. They really didn't have an idea about the inner earth. Of course, they live at 18,000 feet, so maybe they weren't really bothered by it. But other places around the planet. By the way, Tibetan Buddhism has as its symbol a stylized hollow earth.
Wow.
If you order the video that we did, the North Pole Inner Earth Expedition Part 1, you'll see a lot of that original Tibetan footage. And I need to impress upon you how rare this is, because as you know, since 1959, Communist China has controlled Tibet. That's right. And they let tourists go into Tibet for about less than a dozen years. They've shut it off again. You can't get in there. So the film that I have from there and pictures that I have from there are behind locked doors in Tibet. You're not going to see it again anywhere, not in this lifetime.
Wow, fascinating. Yeah, I think there's a Russian legend as well about the Samoyeds. They talk about, this in Siberia, that they went underground to a cavern city to live inside the earth. So I'm open to this idea, but I don't know whether they're giant caves or actual hollow earth, or, they would have to go down quite a distance through the crust into hollow earth.
Well, yeah, if you're talking about going into the inner core, you're talking a 900 to 1,000 mile thick crust. Even if you lowered yourself down on an elevator at 10 miles an hour, think about it, how long it would take you to go 900 miles. It's a long, long way. Of course, that's not possible. If you're walking, you need to have probably about 3 months of supplies to reach the inner earth. And that means light, water, and food. I don't know anybody that can carry 3 months of supplies. And that's just to get in. You need another 3 months to get out.
Exactly, yeah. That's only the one-way journey, Brooks. Exactly.
That's why you're not going to hear many stories about people that have walked into the inside of the planet and lived to tell about it.
Yeah. What is our biggest cave, anyway? Do you know the biggest cave?
I'm not really sure. I went to the Mammoth Cave system. The deepest known area of that cave system is 366 feet. And I haven't been that deep in it. I've only been about 200 feet because those are the caves where you don't have to squeeze through too slimy rocks to get that deep. I'm not too fond of really tight places that far under the ground, so I didn't do it. But I did speak to the cavers that work there at the cave. And I stayed there for a better part of a summer. So I spent a lot of time there. And the locals there that know every nook and cranny of that cave say the deepest area is 366 feet. The deepest hole that we've ever drilled is only 8 miles, and that's in Russia. So the deepest mine that we have is about 6,500 feet.
It gets quite hot as they go down, so, I'm a bit confused about that. So if there was a hollow earth, surely it would be extremely hot in there.
Well, not necessarily. What you're talking about is the mantle of the crust. Yes, the crust is going to be hot because it's undulating all the time. There's a lot of friction in there, a lot of molten material. Mm-hmm. It's not, even to this day, terrifically stable. But the core is going to be quite different. if you have a 6,000 degrees C core, think about the atmosphere out on the outside of our planet. Usably, it's about 6 or 7 miles breathable. You could fly in it probably 20 miles, and that's about it. After that, you're in space. Sure. But inside the planet, if we're talking a gap between the core and the crust of something around 1,000 or 1,100 miles, that's all air. There's no vacuum. It's all atmosphere, which means that air blocks all that energy that's beamed off of that or radiates off of that core. It insulates it between that and the crust. So on the inside of the crust, I would say the temperature's maybe slightly higher than it is on the surface of the planet. Maybe 90 or 100 degrees. Certainly, hospitable to human life. Humans can take, for prolonged periods of time, temperatures of, 225 degrees. If it gets much hotter than that, their cooling systems can't keep up and they'll get weak and pass out. But the human can take 225, even up to 250 for upwards of an hour.
Wow. Fascinating. Brooks, I want to talk to you about some of your books as well. You've wrote quite a few. There's the trilogy, The Arc of Millions of Years, and I think your latest book is the Remembering the Future, The Physics of the Soul. Is that correct?
No, I wrote one after that called Alienated Nation, which is a scientific view of the condition of our government and what can be done to save the Republic. Wow. Remembering the Future was, I think, in 2009, and I wrote Remembering the Future wrote Alienated Nation in 2012.
Tell us a little bit about Remembering the Future, and this is something I do in the show, spirituality and the soul, and I'm deeply interested in. What was the premise for the book?
Well, the premise of the book actually came out of Volume 3 of the Arc of Millions of Years series. I was at the time exposed to the book The Secret, which I read, and it exposed me to this theory of the law of attraction. And I was particularly interested in it because in physics we have, at least on the instrumental side, we have a thing we call the observation effect. This is when we look at something with instruments, we shine light on it, or we beam electrons at it, or we spin the heck out of it, or heat it, or something. Mm-hmm. We observe that sample, but we change it. In our observation of it, we change it. And then I met Dr. Bruce Lipton, and we were talking about the phenomenon that humans have a fairly small set of genes relative to other animals. And yet the genes appear to not equal the number of proteins that make up the human body. And when I was asking him about that, he said, well, it looks like the genes have a choice, a menu of proteins that they can choose from to make. And those choices are influenced by their environment, how much they eat, how much sunlight they're exposed to, whether they work out or not, whether they exercise, or whether they sleep well, and also the consciousness of that being. The energy of the being itself is part of the environment in which those genes, do their protein choices. He said, we know this because we've observed thousands of sets of identical twins. At birth, they're identical. You can scarcely tell them apart. But as they live, and it's theorized, in many of these cases, the observations support it, that they do eat the same things, they do live in the same place, they are exposed to the same temperatures in the same household up to probably the middle of their life, sometimes 30, sometimes 40 years old. And yet, their genes, their genetic DNA begins to stratify, goes in two different directions. At 40, they are no longer genetically identical. And the reason that they have assigned to this change is the consciousness of the being itself that is habitating that body. Obviously, twins are not, they are genetically the same, but they're not the same personality. They're different beings inside there. And so their feelings, their dreams, their temperament affects how the genes work. And he backed this up in his book called The Biology of Belief. He talks about several placebo effects, which are not only common in pharmaceuticals, but they're common in surgeries. Unbelievable. True enough, the belief of the person affects the biology. And so I drove this back at him for 3 hours in this conversation. And I said, look, I'm not a biologist. I have a degree in biology, but my brother's a molecular biologist, very brilliant at it, but I don't spend much time with it. But it leads me to this question. Let's suppose that you have a cell that has reached its point of old age. It's going to die, and it's going to have to divide, or it dies, and the cell next to it has to divide. It needs to make a choice whether to be a tendon, let's say, or a muscle. How does it make that choice? How does it differentiate between which cell to become? He said, well, it takes the information from the cell next to it. I said, well, then let's drive it a little closer to the interface here. Let's say that this cell is right at the interface between the muscle and the bone. It could be one, it could be the other. Or let's say there are only two cells. There's a sperm and there's an egg. How do those cells know? There's no cell next to it. There's no way to know which cell to become as they're dividing and forming this zygote, which will become this fetus, which will become this human. And he said, well, in that case, they fill in the electromagnetic image of the fetus itself. I said, what? He said, there is an electromagnetic image of the fetus in the womb, and the cells fill in that image as they're dividing. That was a real breakthrough. He didn't mention that in his book, but he mentioned it in this conversation with me. And I have it recorded on X Squared Radio if you want to go back and listen to it. But I'm telling you, this was remarkable, because when I put the secret and I put his testimony together, I realized there was a big missing piece. And so I wrote Remembering the Future, the Physics of the Soul and Time Travel, to help people learn definitively how to master applying energy to the universe themselves, to create the universe the way they want it.
A mix of philosophy and science and biology?
Absolutely. And it is mathematical in its build, but it's quite fascinating to read. It is a spiritual book. There are some pieces in the book that I actually removed because they're too personal. And then as I was deciding to take it to the publisher, I put the pieces back in. I said, heck with it. I'm in my mid-50s. I have nothing to lose. Somebody out there needs to hear my journey. So I put it back in the book, and I will tell you I have received some amazing mail from readers of this book.
I think a lot about past lives and the soul's journey, and I've developed, I mean, if you had asked me in my early 20s, Brooks, about, you know, spirituality, I'd have laughed in your face. I would have said, talk to me about engineering and atoms or something, like, you know. So I was a very left brain, you know, and I've developed this idea of spirituality. I'm not religious, but I am spiritual, very, very spiritual person. And I really do believe in the soul and reincarnation. But I think there's some evidence for that too, Brooks. I think there is evidence for past life. I mean, I think there was twins born in New York. I had a lady on the show. She was talking about these twins that were speaking a dead language, Aramaic, where the parents weren't Aramaic, like, you know. And then also the Tibetans, aren't they able to, the Dalai Lama, when he reincarnates, there's a philosophy about that as well?
Yeah. In fact, I went to the Dalai Lama's house, and I was speaking to people who live there and take care of his house. He can't go back there, obviously, because he's exiled from the Chinese government. Mm-hmm. But they believe that the next Dalai Lama might be born in the United States, because they feel that the Dalai Lama needs to be born as a free soul this next time. He's very lucky that he escaped Tibet when they had it open. He was able to get out of there. Mm. It was remarkable that we have his intellect and his wisdom. The idea behind that kind of reincarnation is that that person reincarnates as the same soul over and over again, and is able to somehow preserve his memories from lifetime to lifetime and pass them on to the next little boy. Maybe not all of them, but some of them. They have possessions, and that's how they test the Dalai Lama. They don't know who he's going to be or who he's going to be born to. They have a team that goes and tests the Dalai Lama. They give him a series of questions. What was your favorite toy? You know, these kinds of things. Of course, only they know it. And if he's really the Dalai Lama, he's going to know the answer to those questions. And sure enough, he does.
I remember that from the movie Kundun about Scorsese's film Kundun. It was an awesome film, like, so. Yeah, you know, it's fascinating for me, this whole spiritual thing. I mean, I guess you have developed a spiritual ethic, I suppose, then through your career, then, Brooks.
Well, I would say that I was not raised in a very spiritual environment. Oh, I mean, yeah, we went to church.
Yeah.
But at a very early age, I was able to see the differences between what was written in the scriptures and what they were teaching, and so I really did not digest it. But later on in life, at 19, I began to meditate. I was taught transcendental meditation. And once I could get into that deep state, I started to realize that a lot of the skills that I innately have, maybe other people have as well. And I started to see that people come into this planet, come to this world with some propensity of what they like and what they do not like. It's not something they learn in their childhood. Believe me, I've had 4 kids and raised them, and 3 grandkids, and have a 4th on the way. Each being comes in with their own personality, and they have their own innate skills. Yes, some of them are going to be your genetic memory that's handed on to them. But in the book, I discussed 2 other types of memory. There's a star memory, and there's also a light memory. These are ways knowledge comes to us. And what I have seen, similar to the 100th monkey over series of centuries of research, what I have seen is that different peoples at different times, or even at the same times in different places, observe the same thing. And then they use their skill sets or their propensities to express that. For instance, when I was underneath the Patala in Lhasa, Tibet, which is not a place many people get to see. It's behind chains. I asked to go, and they turned me down. And I just sort of walked a few feet away and looked away like I just can't believe I traveled halfway around this world, and they're not going to let me in. And I was just kind of projecting my thoughts about that, and I tap on my shoulder, and the Chinese guard says, "I'll let you in. Just you and a couple of others." And so he unchained the door and let us in. And the 4 of us walked down to the bottom of the Patala, no lights. We moved the curtains back a little bit to get some light. And what we saw down there was just phenomenal. This stupa made of 4,400 pounds of gold, 10,000 gems all over it. I photographed it. And as soon as it came up on my digital screen, because I really couldn't see it with my naked eye, but as soon as the flash came back and I could see it on the screen, my guide down there, his name was Punsala. I said, "Punsala, you know what this is?" He said, "Yeah, it's a stupa. It's used to intern the souls of Panchen Lamas so they can return back through the dimensions, to the Creator." And sure enough, on the ceiling is painted a 4-dimensional Stargate right above this thing. I said, No. This is a Tesla coil. This is built just like a Tesla coil. See the lightning coming out of it, stylized here in gold ribbons and red, white, and blue wrapped around it. This is to simulate electricity. They didn't have electricity in the 6th century. They didn't even know what it was, but they created this image of it. And so when I went back to the States, I dug through the pictures and I found a picture of a Tesla coil, and I overlaid the 2, and they matched layer for layer, including the lightning coming out of the side of it. So 2 races, 2 beings, 1,300 years apart, saw the same thing, and they expressed it in different ways. So this light memory comes to us, and we use, the skills and information, education that we have at the time to express those ideas.
Beautiful. Beautiful. You talk about the law of attraction, Brooks. I suppose explain that a little bit in detail, that philosophical concept. That is something very important to me at the moment as I walked into my life, and I'm learning about positive thinking and what that I can achieve from health and happiness. And the author, what was her name? Rhonda
Byrne.
Yeah, she wrote a book about, I can't remember the name of it. It was about positive thinking.
Called The Secret.
Secret, yes.
Yeah.
I think, I didn't read the book. It was a movie. I watched a version of it, and
right.
Yeah, but again, I just love this whole. I mean, if there was ever a time the world needed this stuff, Brooks, it's now. But,
well, that's true, and there's no coincidence that there are over 7 billion of us on the planet. We are symbiotes with the planet Earth. There, as far as I know, have never been this many live souls on the planet at one time. In fact, I don't think that there are enough souls to have lived on the planet to make up all the souls that are here. The souls that are here now, many of them came from somewhere else. Well, they're born here. I mean, they didn't travel here physically, but their souls were born somewhere else and bring other experiences to this planet at this time. I know this for a fact. Mm-hmm. Now, the law of attraction is a philosophical way of saying what we call in science resonance. When two frequencies are resonant to one another, they add energy one to another. We call it constructive interference. Mm-hmm. When the two waves come together, they are either in sync with each other or they are dissonant to each other. They're out of phase with one another. In energy, when we throw a bunch of energy together in chaos, we could also call that the universe. Most of the energy is not going to be resonant one with another. It's there, but it's not going to manifest into anything that's usable. About 5% of the energy, 4 to 5% of that energy will resonate one with another, and it will incorporate into other forms. In this universe, and I think in all universes, we see it as protons and electrons. We see these two forms of mass, which are really nothing but resonant energy that have come together to make an electron and to make a proton. I was asked one time at a conference, what are the odds that we would have a carbon-based universe, that we would have a universe made of protons and electrons? And they started calculating the odds, and the zeros started piling up on the chalkboard. And I didn't really contribute at the moment, but after about 20 minutes, I said, you know what, I think it's 100%. And they said, what do you mean 100%? Look at all the other elements. I said, no. It's resonance. The only way that energy could resonate to become physical is the way this universe has formed. There is no other way. And so once we realized that, it was really a turning point for the conference. We realized that dark matter, dark energy is really we call it dark matter, could be very bright for all we know. Mm-hmm. It is unresonant energy. And that energy has to resonate at exactly the right ratio. And that ratio is 1.618 to 1. That's the ratio that they talk about in The Secret. They don't understand it. Mm-hmm. They don't understand this slope of increase is the divine pattern. Yeah. It is the way that energy comes together and makes matter. It can't do it any other way. Any other way, and it will fall apart. That 1.618 to 1 ratio is critical. And that is the key to the Fibonacci sequence. And what I learned as I was teaching college algebra to adults at a university for a couple of years, and the second year I had some adults in my classes that really didn't have a lot of experience with this kind of mathematics. And I felt if I teach this section on Fibonacci math, it's going to go in one ear, out the other. They might pass the test, but they're never going to use it again. So I started to say, we've got to learn to apply this somehow in real life to these people. So I started playing with the calculator. We all know you start with 0 and add 1 to it and you get 1, right? And then 1 to 1 you get 2, and 2 to 1 you get 3, and you could follow it just like the alphabet. A, B, C, 1, 3, 5, and 8, so forth on that way of increase. But what happens if you start in the middle somewhere? So I just took two random numbers that had no association with each other. I took 75 and I took 216. Far enough apart, one's odd, one's even, they're not divisible into each other. They don't know each other from Adam. But you add them together, and you get 291. And so I just followed the Fibonacci process. Add those two to get a third. Take the second and third and add them together to get a fourth, and so forth. Mm-hmm. By the time I got to the 8th number, you could divide the 7th into the 8th, and you got 1.618 to 1.
It's fascinating.
So I said, oh, wow. So I said, well, maybe it only works with integers. So I took decimals. I took fractions. I took rational numbers, irrational numbers, imaginary numbers. It worked every single time. And so I said, if it works with numbers, it'll work with energy. And that is the basis of remembering the future.
Sounds awesome, Brooks. That sounds awesome. You know, I did a philosophy show on the Fibonacci ratio. It's totally mind-blowing because the ancient Egyptians had this off to a fine art. They were in harmony with nature. They have the golden ratio, the Fibonacci ratio, as I say, incorporated into the Great Pyramid and all sorts of other stuff as well. And you know, I think sometimes I look back at ancient civilizations and I wonder what was lost. You know, especially ancient Egypt, Brooks. You know, these guys had something very, very special. I think we've descended into chaos, and hopefully we can come back out of that chaos and back to some sort of natural harmony, Brooks. But like you say, this law of attraction is, you know, just I think we've got to philosophically change ourselves, Brooks. You know, and that's important. I want to, Brooks, I want to do some justice here and get into some of your political stuff, because you've been talking about Agenda 21, and tell us about your politics book, the most recent one then, Brooks.
Well, to be accurate, it's not a book on politics. It's a book on government. Okay. What it does is it talks about the American government as it was originally formed, and then a strange thing happened in 1933. In 1933, we elected a man came to office named Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was the famous governor of New York. He was really larger than life at a time when the nation really needed somebody larger than life. The crash had happened. We'd been through 2 wars. It was one war, and it was just, you know, terrible. 3 recessions, and then a depression, and the whole world, the whole planet was in a rough spot. But strangely enough, he comes to office, and out of the blue, literally within months, this new government, which I call the agency government in the book, is passed. It is a set of agencies which later become, you know, the EPA and the FDA and the FBI and all these bureaus, departments, administrations, and departments were just out of a box, ready to go. And they were assigned budgets, and off they went. Well, 80 years later, in 2013, the agency government is so powerful, they command so much money that they are no longer governing the country. They're ruling the country. And the nation has finally come to the realization that it really doesn't matter who we elect. The elected government doesn't control the government anymore. It's this agency government that controls the government. They outlast and laugh at the congressmen and senators. Mm-hmm. They could care less who's president, and they could care less about us. Yeah. And what has happened is a very, very vague part of the Constitution allowed the agency government to be formed. They allowed it to develop by court precedent into a body that can tax us and fine us and confiscate our property and restrict our commerce. And we have no representation in that government at all. And that is tyranny, and it must go. Mm-hmm. So the book is about a cry for a constitutional convention run by the 50 states, by the governors, not Congress, not the Senate, not on a federal level at all. It's called an Article 5 convention. There's a provision for it in the Constitution, although it's never been done, because it's been feared to open Pandora's box. Really, this would be the Civil War, but it would be a legal one, and it would be conducted according to constitutional guidelines. And somebody, I guess they're working on it right now, to set up an agenda, to set up a structure so that this kind of convention can take place without tearing the whole republic apart. One thing's for sure, they're fighting a $200 trillion body, so it's not going to be easy.
Wow, that book must have set a cat among the pigeons, Brooks.
Well, when I wrote it, I actually wrote it about 4 years ago, and then I tweaked it when I was put in the chair after a motorcycle wreck. I said, okay, I'm going to go through this book and finish it. And I published it in July of 2012. Within a week, it went to #1 on Amazon. And then within 2 weeks, almost every single headline that you read in the paper was a chapter in this book.
Wow.
And then a year later, Mark Levin came out with his book called The Liberty Amendments, which did a much better job than mine at outlining the actual amendments that needed to be done. But that book took off like wildfire, and it went to governors, and I got a lot of comments back on the book. It started something that I don't think is going to be stopped.
Sounds like an important body of work, Brooks. Perhaps, like, for awareness or people, because I think a lot of people, they're disengaged with politics at the moment, especially in America. I mean, they're so patriotic, but I mean, they're feeling really, really let down, Brooks. I mean, they know something's been derailed.
They realize that politics has nothing to do with it. It doesn't matter who is elected. Yeah. It doesn't matter which, lever you pull or which box you check. It's all the same. They all work for the same corporations. They're all funded the same way. When they get to Washington, it just all blends in. You look at the trials, the hearings that are occurring in Congress when they pull these various agencies in. If it's alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, if it's the FBI, if it's the IRS, if it's the GSA, they sit in those chairs and they laugh at those congressmen. They tell them, I don't recall, or I take the fifth, or I'm going to give you a blank piece of paper, or better yet, one that's all black, and that's going to be my evidence to you. And then I'm going to go back to my job, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's why America is frustrated.
Explain Agenda 21 to me, Brooks, because I haven't really got into this. I just know the name gets thrown about a lot, and it's not something I researched heavily, but...
Agenda 21 is an agenda that was put forth by a group of esoterics that many of them are jewelers. And if you know anything about the jewelry industry, these are people that run diamond and gold cartels. Mm-hmm. This group put together an agenda which is called the Rewilding Program. It basically removes humans from large swaths of the ocean and land, forces people to live in mega cities, leaving the rest of the world as a wilderness, which of course they will enjoy. It basically gets the rest of the world out of their way so they can enjoy the world unfettered without you there. And they actually have in their charter the idea that the optimum population for Earth is somewhere around 500 million people. We're obviously well over that number now at 7 billion. So their plan is to seize real estate in large amounts, like millions of acres at a time. And they're already doing it. They've already done several portions of the ocean, claiming that fish need those areas, to grow unfettered, and there can't be any fishing in these areas. And they're using courts, legislation, and they're also using money, of course, to force their way into various jurisdictions. And it's not a laughing matter. It is taking place at very, very high levels.
Wow, fascinating. Is this a conspiratorial element, do you think? Is this like a known agenda? Is it like a conspiratorial agenda, or? It's
not too unknown because it doesn't take long. If you want to look up Agenda 21, you want to look who the board is. I've got the list of their names. Mm-hmm. I have their individual websites, their individual holdings and resumes, and these are the most radical environmentalists that you can imagine. The whole group is put together of, like I said, mostly jewelry and gold cartels.
Yeah. I know the Georgia Guidestones that talk about getting this number down. That they don't want there's a banking elite. Definitely, I'm convinced that those want this population reduced at any cost, Brooks, at any cost. And I think that's a scary perspective. I look into this and it's frightening and it's scary. It's like we're in one way. I look at this Earth, Brooks, and we're in dark times, and then. I look at it and I go, okay, we are, but let's be positive about it. We don't fall by the wayside. Don't give up. If you give up, it's over.
Well, there's a couple ways of looking at it. The real value at existing here on this planet is that you can take your sweat and your know-how and your strength and you can plant a seed in the ground. And by your skill, you can grow food, you can harvest it, package it, and ship it to someone who will then take that value and put it into their lives as food or cattle feed or whatever. In between, there's this system of exchange so that I can go to my job and do what I do for $1, which is just a promise to pay. And then I can ship that dollar electronically to Ireland, and I can buy a piece of art or a piece of wool, and you'll take that value, that system of exchange, and you'll send me my wool. What the bankers have done is they have, I think, improperly figured out, or at least devised for themselves, that the value of Earth is actually the system of exchange and not the work that's done on either end of that process. And that's false. It's a false doctrine. And once people realize that the real value is the work that I can do and that you can do, and that we can figure out a way to exchange that work with or without $1 or any kind of element, any kind of pebble or clam or chunk of gold, it doesn't matter. Once we realize that we don't have to accumulate hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth to be successful on this planet, then the whole thing will change. The whole banking thing will become irrelevant. How much money you have in the bank, how many toys you have in your garage, what your retirement structure looks like will become completely irrelevant.
Sure. What's new for you now, Brooks? What are you working on at the moment? Are you doing any more books? Are you just concentrating on radio, or?
No, I'm always writing. I write every day. So, I've got something else, 2 projects that I'm working on. One is a screenplay, which is called Birth. It's a little odd spelling, but it is designed to teach people about the union of the polarity, open their eyes to the fact that we're not alone on this planet, nor are our designs our own. And it's a science fiction movie, but it's more truth. In the screenplay, none of the names have been changed. They're all exactly who they really are. And that's one of the things the producer likes about it. It's a trilogy, and the movie's coming out as the second movie first, and then the first, and then the third. So it'll be an eye-opener. That's one project I'm working on. And then we're working on a 13-piece series with the Discovery Channel on Hollow Earth theory. And then, of course, in my private life, I have the company and trying to get electric cars out on the road.
There mustn't be enough hours in the day for you, Brooks, will there?
We don't work days; we work calendars.
For sure. Yeah, what was I going to say? Yeah, FDR, was he not a Freemason? Or suspected as a Freemason?
He was, but more importantly, the discovery, and it unfortunately didn't happen. It was suspected, and you could tell by what we did after the war. But it's now known that the Soviets had, in fact, invaded Washington, D.C. with a number of very powerful agents that had infiltrated, in fact, probably were the early leaders of those agencies, may still be. But the most important one was a man named Harry Hopkins, who was a very powerful Soviet agent that had befriended President Roosevelt and actually ran the entire war with one goal in mind, and that was to make sure that the Soviets ended up with half of Europe, which they did. We have exactly the same thing happening today. We have an agent in Washington who's very close to the president, who has very high protection, and she is running everything.
Fascinating, Brooks. Fascinating. Brooks, where can we get a copy of your book? I presume all usual outlets, Amazon and...
Yep, all the usual places. Now, if you buy it from the website, if you go to the book's websites, Remembering the Future or Alienated Nation, you get the book, of course, autographed, but you'll also get the book in audio. I will send it to you as a link, so you'll have the audio version and the written version. So if you're not a great reader, don't worry about it. I read it for you.
Wow, nice. Wow, yeah. There's not enough audiobooks out there, Brooks. I think it's great, and I know somebody that can't physically read, and they use audiobooks all the time, and it's a great thing. I mean, he has a disability, so I did an audiobook for him for my own book, and that was great because I did it especially for him. But there is a lot of people out there that just like to drive as well, and just put the CD in or whatever.
Sure. Well, I notice a lot of Americans have the same disability, and that's the American school system. So that's why I put the audiobooks out.
Wow, fascinating. Brooks, I thank you for your time today. I really do. What a fascinating guy. You're such a prolific researcher, and, I commend you in what you do, and I can't wait to tune into X Squared Radio now. That's x2-radio.com, is that correct?
Yeah, or you can go to xsquaredradio.com. Either way, you can put it into Google, it'll take you right there, and the player opens up right on the screen, so you can just listen to what's going on the network at any time. If you do that at 8 p.m. on Sunday nights, you'll be listening to me. Wow. There's a call-in number right there, so if you feel compelled to call, please do, by the way. Call and ask questions. We'll answer them live on the air for 3 hours tonight.
Wow. And it's mostly science you do, a science webcast?
Yeah, it's, of course, we tackle all kinds of subjects. It's not just space stuff and biology stuff. We also tackle the news of the day and what's going on. And, it can get quite impassioned sometimes.
Do you ever look into chemtrails, Brooks?
I have.
What do you think of it?
Jury's still out for me.
Me too.
I know the aviation industry very well, and I just cannot get past the idea that commercial airliners are dumping chemicals into the air. I know everything that goes on those planes, and I'm just not convinced that's happening. Now, if there are military planes out there doing it, I don't doubt it, but not commercial passenger planes. Contrails can look just like chemtrails.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, Brooks, I thank you for your time today. We're just coming up to the top of the second hour. What a fascinating chat, Brooks. You come back anytime. You've an open invitation to come back anytime, Brooks. And I thank you for your work, and I thank you for your time today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you for your time, Brooks. Take care. Speak soon.
All right. Bye-bye. But really did not know where these auroras come from, either the northern one or the southern one, the Australis or Borealis. The doubt came when we started to do what we call a scatter plot. Scatter plot is where we will plot one piece of data against another piece of data to see if there's a correlation. We're looking for a straight line. We're looking for something, 1-to-1. Every time this happens, that happens. We did a scatter plot between solar wind information and solar flare information and the auroras. And we found that they did not line up very well. They do happen at the same time, but they also happen quite independent of each other. And it was such a question that JPL was contracted to build a set of satellites. Some of the team calls them Themis. I call them Themis. But they're 5 satellites in one nose cone. We launched it in 2006. 2009. And the satellites went up there, and it took a while to get into position. They're not particularly powered. You just have to wait mathematically for them to distribute. They're at different altitudes, and so they travel at different speeds around the planet, and it's an algorithm as to when they line up. Like, believe me, anybody that has a propensity towards seasickness, they don't want to be any part of this expedition.
I'm not a great seafarer. I'll watch from the armchair anyway.
It's not going to be fun.
So, Brooks, I'm sure you've heard about the pyramids down in Antarctica. There's a photograph circling of what people think was an ancient pyramid buried in the ice. Have you looked into that? Do you see any credibility in that?
To be honest, I haven't spent much time looking at the Antarctic at all. That's one of the, I guess, curses of being a PhD is you know a lot about very little. Mm-hmm. And we're just taught to focus in on one thing and try to get as much data, really become an expert on that one thing. And although I venture out more than most, I have to be honest, I just don't have that much information about the Antarctic.
Sure. But on the science then of it, I mean, does the Aurora Borealis, the Northern Lights or the Southern Lights for that matter, did they fit into this anyway scientifically? Do we have any, knowledge on that, Brooks, how this fits into, does that, as they are a polar phenomenon, does that fit into this hollow Earth theory?
Well, it does, and you ask the question in just about the right way. We, as a scientific community, I won't say myself and my team, and the ice for the Antarctic has been growing steadily for about 50 years. It's larger now than I think, any observation we've ever made. And it's quite thick. Some of it is, several thousand feet thick. So it's obviously a place where you can get some very ancient snapshots of the planet by taking cores of that ice. And in that you can look at microbes and gas content and all kinds of volcanic and snowfall data going back, millions of years if you want to. And that's what mostly goes on down there in the Antarctic. The polar area is not observable. I mean, it's just completely covered with thick ice. But the canyons that exist down there are bigger than anything we have on dry land. It is incredible how deep into the earth those ground formations go. In the Arctic, the sea is about 4,400 meters deep. It is by far the most violent waters on the planet. It's very typical to see 10-story seas up there. Wow. So even in a 450-foot long ship, you're going to be a little bit like a dinghy going up and down, up and down, up and down, and a ladder going out into space. And then the system turns on, and we hope for an aurora to happen, and then we can take these measurements like in different orbits going out into space. Mm-hmm. And it was a couple of years, I think it was in 2011, all of a sudden this paper comes out. We finally found the source for the Aurora Borealis. And the article called it Cosmic Bullets. Wow. What happened was the satellites lined up. They all turned on, all 5 satellites. And there was a magnetic explosion between satellites number 3 and number 4. And the explosive force went past 4 and 5 out into space, and then past 3, 2, and 1 toward Earth. And when it was calculated to have reached Earth, the Aurora Borealis happened. The northern lights lit up. And so they published the paper, and really it was the only paper published by the team. And I wrote the team back and I said, this is junk. You can't have one event and then draw conclusions from that. You have to get more data. You've got to understand there needs to be repeatability and reliability. You've got to have, a way to plot this data out so that you can see what the error is in
Yeah, the thing is, there's a military reason, but then there's also feeds the conspiracy theorists. And I mean, I don't mind a little conspiracy theory, Brooks, but I need to see some data in it. I need to be able to follow the data and make a reasonable assumption or a reasonable logistic, logical thought, critical thinking. I have to have something to go on, but.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, on the South Pole then at the Antarctica, I mean, on Google Earth there's a lot of people talking about this big giant cave that goes in. I mean, you can see that on Google Earth. Have you looked at the caves there in Antarctica?
Well, unfortunately, everything on the 60th parallel to the south is also animated. The Antarctic is quite a bit different than the Arctic in that there is a lot of landmass that goes with the Antarctic.